What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Monday, February 8th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at the point guard position. I'm going to give you a value play here. I like Patty Mills from the San Antonio Spurs playing the Golden State Warriors, who have the 11th worst defense overall, and they give up the 13th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Patty Mills has averaged 21.2 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He scored 19, 14, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 29, 26, and 23 minutes. But he's projected at 21 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.5 times value. He's only $3,800 FanDuel salary, and he's $400 more on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 233 points scored in this game, and Patty Mills, he scored 17, 32, 39, 16, and 24 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Golden State Warriors. So that's pretty decent player versus team history. I think he makes a nice FanDuel play, and I think he can even hit value on DraftKings. So I like Patty Mills here versus the Golden State Warriors. Now another point guard that I like is Kobe White from the Chicago Bulls playing the Washington Wizards, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Kobe White has averaged 28.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. He scored 28, 24, and 27 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 27, 33, and 32 minutes. He's projected at 27.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's $5,600 FanDuel salary and $800 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 237.5 points scored in this game. So we got a high-scoring game, a fast-paced game, a fantastic matchup, and Kobe White has scored 35, 31, 47, and 42 fantasy points in the last 4 games versus the Washington Wizards. So excellent player versus team history here. So I like Kobe White here versus the Washington Wizards. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I like Dillon Brooks from the Memphis Grizzlies playing the Toronto Raptors, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Dillon Brooks has averaged 26.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 19, 14, and 40 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 28, 27, and 27 minutes. He's projected at 25.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.4 times value. He's $4,700 FanDuel salary and $600 more on DraftKings. Vegas think there's going to be 224 points scored in this game, and Dillon Brooks scored 41 fantasy points in his last game versus the Toronto Raptors. Now, he's got a low floor, but he's got a huge ceiling here, so I like Dillon Brooks here versus the Toronto Raptors. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Tim Hardaway Jr. from the Dallas Mavericks playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and although they've been pretty good versus opposing shooting guards, Tim Hardaway Jr. has averaged 25.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. He scored 22, 24, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 27, 23, and 30 minutes. He's projected at 25 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's 5,100 FanDuel salary and 400 more on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 222.5 points scored in this game, and Tim Hardaway Jr. has scored 32, 31, and 31 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. So I like Tim Hardaway Jr. here versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. I'm going to give you a value play here. I like Rudy Gay from the San Antonio Spurs playing the Golden State Warriors, who have the 11th worst defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Rudy Gay has averaged 22.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 22 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. He scored 23 and 15 fantasy points in his last 2 games, playing 25 and 19 minutes. He's projected at 21.9 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.5 times value. He's 4,000 FanDuel salary and 400 more on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 233 points scored in this game, and Rudy Gay has scored 24, 9, 24, 31, and 20 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Golden State Warriors. So he's got that 30 plus fantasy point upside. So I like Rudy Gay here versus the Golden State Warriors. Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Now, I know I'm giving you a lot of mid-range plays here, but that's just how it's going on this slate. I don't like to give all the studs because there's no fun in that. You guys know to play the stud players, LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, Nikola Jokic. Although I occasionally will give you those guys, I assume you guys know those guys are studs. You know to put them in your lineup. I think it's the value plays and the mid-range plays that are hard to pick out or identify on the slate. So I'm doing my best to try to bring some light to the players that are in good spots that have a medium to low price tag. So anyways, I like Mikal Bridges from the Phoenix Suns playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Mikal Bridges has averaged 28.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He scored 33, 29, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 37, 31, and 32 minutes. He's projected at 28.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.1 times value. He's 5,600 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. So I like Mikal Bridges here versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I like Patrick Williams from the Chicago Bulls playing the Washington Wizards, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Patrick Williams has averaged 19.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game with a 17% usage rate. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 31, 38, and 23 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 33, 33, and 32 minutes. He's projected at 24.3 fantasy points here tonight, and that's 5.4 times value. He's only 4,500 FanDuel salary, and he's 600 more on DraftKings. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 237.5 points scored in this game. So it's a great matchup, high-scoring game. This is a nice game to stack here. So I like Patrick Williams here versus the Washington Wizards. Another power forward that I like, especially on DraftKings, is Chris Boucher from the Toronto Raptors playing the Memphis Grizzlies, who have the 12th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing power forwards, Chris Boucher has averaged 29.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 23 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He scored 48, 34, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 26, and 18 minutes. He's projected at 29.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's 5,900 FanDuel salary, and he's 500 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 224 points scored in this game. So I like Chris Boucher here versus the Memphis Grizzlies. Okay, moving on to the center position. I like Andre Drummond. I think he's still way too cheap on FanDuel. They refuse to raise this guy's price. So Andre Drummond, he's averaged 44.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 32% usage rate. He scored 46, 40, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 30, 29, and 22 minutes. He's projected at 44 fantasy points here tonight, and that's 6.1 times value on FanDuel. He's still only 7,200 FanDuel salary, but he is 1,000 more on DraftKings, so I love that FanDuel price. So I like Andre Drummond here versus the Phoenix Suns. Oh, and take a look at his last 5 games versus the Phoenix Suns. He scored 66, 51, 52, 36, and 36 fantasy points in his last 5 games. So I think he makes a smash FanDuel play. So yeah, I like Andre Drummond, especially on FanDuel here versus the Phoenix Suns. Okay, another center that I like, a mid-range play here. I like Montrezl Harrell from the LA Lakers playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Montrezl Harrell has averaged 25.2 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 25 minutes per game with a 19% usage rate. He scored 26, 18, and 32 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 24, 24, and 28 minutes. He's projected at 25.9 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 5,200 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 218 points scored in this game. Fantastic matchup. And he scored 30, 21, 28, and 54 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that's great player versus team history. We got a fast-paced game. So I like Montrezl Harrell here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.